Hey everyone, welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're going to embark on a sprawling 400 million year journey to understand literally the very foundation of our modern world. So let's just dive right in.
Think about it. How did a sticky, foul-smelling sludge just oozing out of the dirt in ancient Mesopotamia become the beating heart and really the ultimate vulnerability of our modern world? It's honestly a staggering transformation. We're going to track exactly how humanity went from looking at this stuff as just a curious puddle to actually fighting global wars over it.
Section 1. The Ancient Black Goo and the Early Uses of Oil.
So, thousands of years ago, people in Mesopotamia, which is modern-day Iraq, started noticing this thick, black, sharp-smelling liquid just naturally seeping from cracks in the earth. Now, they didn't know what it was, but they experimented. The Mesopotamians realized pretty quickly that it repelled water, right? So they used it to waterproof their wooden boats and to strengthen their brick walls. Over in Egypt, they actually used it to preserve their dead. In fact, the Arabic word for this natural bitumen was mumia, which is exactly where we get the modern word mummy. And get this, over in China, they were already drilling deep into the ground using these long, hollow bamboo pipes to extract natural gas and oil for light and heat. The Persians, they weaponized it for flaming arrows. The Greeks used it for skin and joint medicine. Basically, these ancient civilizations were brilliantly harnessing this incredible substance based purely on observation, without having any real idea where it actually came from.
Section 2. The Real Science of Oil, or How It's Actually Made. You see, despite all those brilliant ancient applications, the true origin of this black liquid remained a complete mystery for millennia. So, what actually is oil? I'm sure you've heard the classic myth. Does oil actually come from dinosaurs? It's a fun idea, isn't it? Like, a T-Rex gets buried, and then millions of years later, boom, it's fueling your car.
But the answer is a definitive no. Actually, scratch that. There's zero dinosaur in your gas tank. Oil actually comes from microscopic marine life. The real story begins way further back, about 300 to 400 million years ago, which is long before the dinosaurs even existed. Back then, the Earth was covered in these massive ancient oceans, just teeming with billions and trillions of microscopic organisms, algae and plankton.
Okay, so here is the actual geological recipe for oil. Step 1. These microscopic creatures died, and their remains sort of drifted down to settle on the deep ocean floor, getting buried under layers and layers of sand and clay. Step 2. Over millions of years, these layers piled up, heavily pushing the organic matter way deeper into the earth, where heat and extreme pressure steadily started to build. Step 3. This incredibly intense underground environment completely transformed the biological remains into a waxy substance that scientists call kerogen. And finally, Step 4. When the temperature hits this perfect sweet spot of between 60 and 120 degrees Celsius, that kerogen breaks down and converts into crude oil. Oh, and if it gets even hotter, it turns into natural gas. And because oil is lighter than water, it slowly rises up through tiny fissures in the rocks until it hits an impermeable layer of stone. And that's where it pulls into those massive underground reserves that we tap into today.
Moving on to Section 3, the first commercial boom and a totally new industry.
For thousands of years, humanity basically just scraped up whatever oil naturally seeped to the surface. But then the 19th century hits, and the Industrial Revolution is absolutely roaring in Europe and America. Cities are growing, factories are running around the clock, and people desperately needed a reliable light source. At the time, they largely relied on whale oil, but the problem was whales were being hunted to near extinction, which made whale oil incredibly scarce and, frankly, wildly expensive. The world desperately needed a new fuel. Enter Abraham Gessner, a Canadian geologist who in 1846 figured out how to distill a clean, bright, and safe fuel directly from raw crude oil. He called it kerosene. It was a massive hit. Almost overnight, everyone realized that if they could just find large enough quantities of crude oil underground, they could build an absolute empire.
And this is exactly where a guy named Edwin Drake enters the picture. Now, Drake wasn't some brilliant geologist or a trained engineer. He was literally a retired railway worker. A small company sent him out to Titusville, Pennsylvania, to see if he could somehow drill for oil. And for months, he failed completely. The money dried up, and people honestly thought he was crazy. But Drake was incredibly stubborn. On August 27, 1859, at a depth of just 69 feet, his drill pipe suddenly filled up with a dark, thick liquid. It was the world's first successful commercial oil well. This single event triggered absolute chaos. Thousands of people rushed into Pennsylvania, completely transforming quiet farmlands into massive, chaotic, booming drilling towns basically overnight.
Section 4. Rockefeller's refining monopoly and his grip on power.
So while everyone else was obsessing over frantically digging holes in the ground, one man saw a much bigger picture. Don't drill, refine, and transport. That was the absolute secret to John D. Rockefeller's dominance. Rockefeller watched this chaotic early oil boom and realized pretty quickly that drilling was incredibly risky. I mean, a well could dry up tomorrow and just bankrupt you instantly. Plus, raw crude oil straight out of the dirt was essentially useless anyway. It had to be cleaned and refined into kerosene before you could even sell it. So in 1863, instead of drilling, Rockefeller invested in his first refinery.
And that one strategic pivot led to a jaw-dropping number. Ready for this? $400 billion. That is John D. Rockefeller's estimated peak net worth when you adjust it for today's dollars, easily making him one of the wealthiest individuals in all of human history. So how did he actually do it? Well, by striking secret, highly discounted shipping deals with the railways. Because he could transport his refined oil way cheaper than anyone else, he just completely slashed his prices, drove all his competitors to the very brink of bankruptcy, and then simply bought them out, one by one.
By 1870, he formed Standard Oil, and within a decade, this single company controlled a staggering 90% of the entire U.S. refined oil market. We're talking total domination here. The government actually grew so terrified of his absolute power that in 1911, the Supreme Court ordered Standard Oil to be broken up into a bunch of smaller companies just to restore some basic competition. But ironically, this completely backfired. The individual shares of those newly broken up companies absolutely skyrocketed in value, and Rockefeller, who obviously kept his shares, became richer than ever before.
Section 5. Engines and the Middle East. The power shift.
Now, while Rockefeller was busy counting his mountains of money, the world was actually shifting completely beneath his feet. Up until the late 19th century, remember, oil was mainly just used to keep the lamps lit. But then came the internal combustion engine. It was a real game changer. In 1886, Carl Benz built the first successful petrol-powered car, and by 1908, Henry Ford launched the mass-produced Model T. Suddenly, oil wasn't just for lighting rooms anymore. It was the essential fuel for modern transportation. As global demand completely exploded, scientists realized America didn't actually hold all the cards. In 1908, a massive commercial oil reserve was discovered in Iran by a British expedition. In 1932, the search began over in Saudi Arabia, which honestly yielded years of frustrating failure, until 1938, when drillers finally struck an absolute ocean of oil at Dammam Well No. 7. These discoveries completely shifted the geopolitical balance of power. As it turned out, the largest oil reserves on Earth weren't in the West at all. They were buried deep under the sands of the Middle East.
Initially, Western companies were the ones extracting this Middle Eastern oil, and of course, they kept most of those massive profits. But the producing nations soon woke up to their own leverage. In 1960, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, and Venezuela banded together to form OPEC. Their goal was pretty simple, really. Take back control of their own natural resources and dictate the pricing themselves. They realized a fundamental truth: the modern global economy simply could not survive without their oil.
Section 6. The Global Dependency and a Vulnerable World.
So, what actually happens when the entire world relies on a single commodity, and then, all of a sudden, the tap is just turned off? Well, in 1973, a major conflict broke out in the Middle East. Because several Western nations supported Israel in the war, the Arab oil-producing nations decided to retaliate with the ultimate economic weapon. They slashed oil production and embargoed supplies. And the effect? It was immediate, and it was catastrophic. The world's economy was literally brought to a standstill. The price of oil multiplied in a matter of weeks. We're talking massive lines forming at gas stations, factory production costs skyrocketing out of control, and hyperinflation gripping the entire globe. It was a brutal, real-world wake-up call that modern life was completely at the mercy of this one black liquid.
You know, it's wild to think about. 4,000 years ago, oil was literally just a simple, sticky paste that Mesopotamian farmers were using to waterproof their wooden boats. Today, it is the absolute heartbeat of the global economy. It gave us light, it gave us unprecedented speed, it built our massive industries, and it continues to dictate global wealth and geopolitics every single day. It truly is the main architect of the modern era. Which leaves us with a final, absolutely vital question to reflect on. When our entire civilization relies so heavily on a single 400-million-year-old resource, is that dependency our greatest strength, or is it our biggest weakness? The history of oil shows us exactly how incredible human ingenuity can be, but it also reveals the very fragile thread by which our entire modern world hangs. Thanks so much for watching The Explainer, and we'll see you next time.